you could say, well, why should they hold a privileged position when they're owned by a conglomerate who have huge amounts of power and control over the narrative on particular issues? Why should they be able to hold a monopoly? But what I think the most important thing for me over the years of just the feedback we've gotten.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 176 for the 10th of October 2024. So I don't have an editorial bit at the top of this show, partly because Kevin is quizzing me and I get to give my opinion after the interview. You'll see why that's following the interview when you hear it. But before I play the interview, I just want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. We really appreciate everyone who donates. It's not a huge amount of money, but it keeps the lights on, pays the phone bill and the web hosting and that sort of thing. Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. Also, it's great for the morale when we get a new patron. It lets us know that people are listening and appreciating the podcast. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in Irish media, and you're more than welcome to listen for free. But if you think that you could do the same as those donors and throw in the price of a cup of coffee or maybe the price of an ad on Spirit Radio once or twice a month, there's details of how to do that on the website and at the end of the show. If you listen to the radio and you still have one of those radios where you turn a knob to move a little red needle around the dial, and if you're listening around the left-hand end close to Radio 1, you might hear Spirit Radio, which was established in 2010. It's not quite a national station, but it has transmitters in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Kildare, all the major population centres. And on the line, I have Wendy Grace, who is the presenter of the morning show from 10 to 12. Is that right, Wendy, on Spirit? And she's also the director of her own media training company, Compass Communications. I think she's in the studios of Spirit as we talk. Wendy, what is Spirit Radio?
So basically the purpose of Spirit Radio is to be a radio station that the focus is the positive sound. That's kind of our tagline, but our mission statement overall is to help people to begin or renew a relationship with God. Mm-hmm. I would say, like my show in particular, I would say probably 80-90% of the content is just everyday kind of news, lifestyle, current affairs. The music kind of does a lot of the kind of uplifting faith-based stuff. Contemporary Christian music is huge in the likes of the States, and a lot of the artists that we play have kind of crossed over into the I suppose secular music world, if you want to call it that. So
can I be a little unkind, Wendy?
Yes,
if I was to be a little unkind, I might say that different people listen to radio for different reasons, but there's perhaps a chunk of people who listen to radio maybe as audio wallpaper, and it's the radio stations that appeal to that just try not to be in any way offensive sounding. And the music that you play, I have to say, seems to be appealing to that audience. If you listen to it carefully, it seems incredibly bland, but it fills that need. And then if you listen to it even more carefully, you see that there's an awful lot of sort of Jesus messages. Is that an unfair characterization?
Well, the music has a very specific breakdown. So we have to play, according to our license, a certain percentage of contemporary Christian music, Irish music, and then secular music, if you want to call it that. The best compliment I always love getting is when people, which happens all the time, accidentally stumble across the station, as you said, very close to the frequency of Radio 1, and they stumble across us, and it's lucky for us, and they kind of feel like, I like it, but I don't know why. I think, a lot of the music is very subtle. And like you say, it's just kind of on the background. It's uplifting. It's positive. A lot of the stuff as well, for me as a mum.
It is bland, though, isn't it?
Oh, I disagree. Some of the artists that are playing are like Grammy Award winning. They've sold hundreds.
Yeah, those two are not mutually exclusive. But I will not argue. You cannot account for taste. I won't argue music tastes with you. Certainly, I would lose.
Yeah, well, everybody has a different taste, I suppose. But, one of the things that I love about the music in particular, especially as a parent and a mum, is and we're doing something that unfortunately a lot of Irish radio stations aren't doing. We're playing a much greater ratio of male to female artists. So there's a lot of really good kind of contemporary Christian female artists who are really positive role models. And that, and the messages in their music are very positive. It's certainly, whether I was into my faith or not, it's the type of kind of lyrics that I would want my kids to be listening to, things that are positive, things that are uplifting, things that are going to build their self-esteem. I often do an exercise. I do it once or twice a year where I kind of trying to stay connected to kind of a younger audience. I look at, what's in the kind of charts in Ireland, and I look at the lyrics of some of those things and I compare them to some of the lyrics of some of the stuff we're playing. And like, it is quite flabbergasting in terms of just what's being absorbed. You kind of, a lot of how we feel about ourselves or our day, you're getting back what you're putting into your mind, your body and your soul, so I think that music can be powerful in that way. And again, like, that is the feedback that we've had so often over the years, is just, I didn't even know it was a Christian station. And a lot of our music would just be your one of the most popular songs on our playlist at the moment.
You see, Wendy, I'm not entirely sure that's a boast, because of that, the way that is subtly included. You might say what you call the message, and I'm not going to go into propagandists from previous eras and their recommendations of the ratio to propaganda and non-propaganda content. But I want to just kind of allow listeners to have a, kind of an idea of what the station is. This is just a clip from a song called Safe by Neon Feather featuring Chris Cron, none of which I've heard before.
No politics, no government could overthrow you. I know I'll be safe. I know I'll be safe with you. I know I'll be safe. I know I'll be safe with you. 'Cause you are my strongest defender. Nothing can stand against you. I know I'll be safe.
So, Wendy, that's kind of typical of just sort of sounds that you have, but what I want to allow listeners to have an idea of kind of the setup of the station. You are licensed by previously the BAI, I think now by the Commission Naman. You cover probably, looking at your transmitter range, well up there, at least 85 or 90% of the population of the country, but although probably not the area. If you're in the Glentees Mountains, you're probably not going to pick up the signal, but probably 90% of the population are covered by your signal. Looking at your accounts, you have a turnover of less than €700,000 per year. How much of that, do you know, comes from advertising?
I actually don't. I just present the morning show, so I don't sit on the board or don't have anything to do with accounts, thankfully. So I don't know the exact.
For comparison, that would be a couple of dozen ads on Morning Ireland. By the standard of other national radio stations, it doesn't even describe it adequately to say that you're a minnow as represented by your advertising or as represented by your total income. And you also appeal for donations on the station. And I've seen that announced on Twitter. And the one tweet that I'm looking at here, it's kind of celebrating 31,000 raised. And the one piece of information it doesn't say when it's giving that information is 31,000 over what period? Is that in a day, a month, a year?
Yeah, so 3 times a year we do support drives, we call them. It's very similar. This is kind of how Christian radio stations run and operate in the States in particular. Right, so it's kind of modelling that model. And
public radio as well, this big national sort of BBC standard.
Yeah,
so it's very common in other countries. Yeah.
They would make a lot more, and in the UK as well, they would make a lot more in these particular fundraising weeks. But basically, we ask our listeners to support the station. We are a charity, so I don't know the percentage breakdown, but the vast majority of the radio station is funded by the listener. So some of those would give one-off donations during weeks, like the support drives. Others are kind of monthly supporters of the radio station. So obviously that's our kind of core listeners.
That 31,000, I'm not asking for your exact accounts, but is your sense that refers to one of these?
So that we would have a goal during these kind of support drive weeks.
So that's coming up at something like 120 grand a year from donations. And if you've got less than 700 grand in income, even if all of the rest was advertising, that is really a very, very small fraction of something like a station that like Today FM or News Talk or even Radio 1 would be taking in, that indicates you have a very, very small audience. But you don't participate in the JNLR, the listenership research. Is that correct?
Yeah, we conduct our own research with Amórach, and as far as I understand, it's very expensive to be part of the JNL, or as you rightly say, we have a very small turnover. We have a very small turnover, and again, obviously, it'd be great to have a bigger turnover, but it's something I'm very proud of the standard of broadcasting that we output, and obviously,
you sound super professional. I have to say that you absolutely do not sound like a pirate radio from Portumna in the 1980s. You sound very, very professional.
I mean, the standard of the guests that we get on the show, and it's always very refreshing to me. Often, if I'm getting a particular guest on that would be very well known or does a lot of other radio shows or whatever, it's interesting. Obviously, when they first are asked to come on, they're very curious about the station, what it's all about. And I think they're always pleasantly surprised, especially when they do an interview with me. They think, oh, that's just like any other radio station. And, we've had a lot of great, and those kind of bigger names that would be
Wendy, I won't compare that with our experience on this podcast, but I want to kind of give people who don't know your station, kind of more of an idea of exactly what's going on with it. And I guess my first question is that in the very early 1990s, when non-RTE radio was being licensed and the pirate radio stations were closed down, one of the first things that happened was that there was a standard that political radio stations and religious radio stations would not be allowed. And it appears clearly that the religious aspect of that has been modified to allow you to broadcast. But in Ireland, we have an absolute rule that, for example, would simply be out of the question to have Fianna Fáil FM or any radio station that that is oriented towards a particular political outlook. It would be absolutely.
Some people might argue with you on that.
They might, and those. Wendy, allow me to finish the question. They might, and they would be entitled to take a complaint to Commission na Man, and people regularly do. And it would also in Ireland be absolutely unacceptable to have a radio station that is, let's say, the Greenpeace environmental radio station or the Save Portumna local hospital radio station. For people who may or may not disagree with it, give me the elevator pitch on why a particular point of view, in your case, a religious point of view, should get a national frequency, a national network of transmitters on a fairly, crowded radio dial and have its message prioritized over others.
Well, the interesting thing about Ireland was before we were given the license, which we fought for I think 14 years, we were the only country in Europe that didn't have a Christian radio station. And I would posit that any radio station, especially those who do news or current affairs, will have a particular lens or a particular outlook with which they present their broadcasting. Obviously, when it comes...
Or a series of them.
Perhaps. I would, it's a long time since I graduated, but I would kind of think that unfortunately, we are a country that lacks media diversity.
I totally agree.
There's a lot of journalists. We come from in and around the same place, in and around the same social backgrounds. One of the things that has changed very rapidly, obviously, as we live in a kind of 24/7 news cycle, journalists aren't kind of getting out and about and doing the kind of beat on the street thing. So we're all in our little echo chambers. And,
Wendy, all of those, and there exist completely valid criticisms of other journalists, but I'm talking about Spirit Radio. And the question I asked is, why, if it is a religious view, why should one view be given a privileged position over others in the religious sphere when that is not allowed either in the party political sphere or the single issue political sphere or many others?
I wasn't part of the license application, but I guess that's why it went on for. I guess that's why it went on for 14 years, and for me, it's as simple as you can choose what media you consume. Nobody's blasting the radio. It's your choice what you listen
hang
to.
on a second, Wendy. The comparison that I'm making is that a particular political view cannot legally be privileged if it's party political, cannot be legally privileged if it is non-party single issue political, but it can be privileged if it is, in theory, religious-based. By the way, before I go on, I think it's a good thing that you insist. I support the idea because I think there should be lots of different voices, even the ones that I disagree with. But I am challenging you to justify it, even though I personally agree with you existing.
I think it's probably a mistake to confuse religion and political outlook. I wouldn't call us a religious radio station. I don't feel that way when I'm presenting my show. I think that it's a representation of a big part of our culture. The majority of people in this country still would identify as some form of Christian denomination. And that as well, for me, I would actually say from an Irish perspective and an Irish history perspective, it's actually quite extraordinary what we've managed to achieve in terms of, when we first said we're going to make it, because in the States, Christian radio stations, they are of a particular denomination, right? So
yes.
You'll have a
no,
Catholic
not
radio
always,
station.
not always. No, that's
or
not true.
For the most part, I believe New Zealand is the only one who has a station that has a similar model to us, or an evangelical model. When we kind of said, no, we're going to do something that's cross-denominational, north and south of the country.
Yeah. Would you broadcast north of the border?
People on medium wave, people didn't think that it was going to work, and it has.
Sorry, just Wendy, to be clear, you broadcast with a transmitter based in the north, or just to the north from a transmitter in the south?
I actually don't know the technicalities of that. I know.
Fair enough.
Sorry. Some of the questions are just not in my kind of.
And that's in your book, free to say that, and that's entirely valid.
So that for me has been, I come from a family where we have, my mum and dad are different. My dad is Church of Ireland, my mum's Catholic. It has been extremely enriching over the years to just learn from, different Christian denominations. But I think the most, if you were to say to me, well, why should you? I guess that's why you have, it was the BAI or Commission Man. That's why you have a licensing authority to look at all the issues that you're talking about. And that's why it took so long, I suppose, to have the very particulars of what we had to fulfill in our license, whether it's, the amount of Irish music we play or the amount of Irish language features that we play. And certainly there's extremely strict rules around advertising any sort of.
Sure. And all of that, but you're still not addressing the point that I'm asking, is just about religion. Why is it that a particular view can have a privileged voice, getting pretty scarce space on the dial? As you said, it took you 14 years to get a license. You have a very, very advanced coverage of the country. As I said, probably about 90% population coverage. And for that, we don't have any official figures, but the advertising sales would tend to indicate that your audience is minuscule. If you don't want to address that question, that's fair enough, I'll go on, but you can accept perhaps that is a valid question.
Yeah, I think my answer is that it's a huge part of our culture, our Christian heritage, our Christian faith. Fine. I think that's if you actually spend a bit, if you listen to Spirit compared to some other Christian stations, we are very much, I would say, it's proposing rather than imposing. If you want to call them religious radio stations, they have, pastors giving sermons. We don't have that. We just have music and chat.
Understood. Understood.
One of the things I actually think that's most important, or what makes us different, is that because the vast majority of our funding comes from donations from listeners and from others, we're not kind of beholding to advertisers either.
Yeah, which is very important. That was one of the reasons that I said that it's a good thing to exist.
We're also not part of, a big conglomerate that really calls the shots on how. You're talking about why should there be a privileged position? Let's accept that there is radio station.
I'm asking you the question why that should exist.
That there is radio station. You could say, well, why should they hold a privileged position when they're owned by a conglomerate who have huge amounts of power and control over the narrative on particular issues? Why should they be able to hold a monopoly. But what I think the most important thing for me over the years of just the feedback we've gotten and the, the letters and the emails and the texts and all of that is the need that seems to be so great is just having something that is positive and uplifting in a media landscape that is so often extremely depressing. Let's face it.
I understand exactly what you're saying, Wendy. But I am doing the interviewing, and I'm not going to let you dominate it. And I know that we have somewhat limited time, and I do want to get to other questions. I think the demand is maybe reflected in the audience side. But one thing I just wanted to ask you is, and you mentioned about yourself coming, which I wasn't aware of, coming from a mixed background in terms of religion. As you see the influence, be it by staff members, be it by what sort of things that you're promoting, what's the mix between Catholic and Protestant? And by Protestant, I would mean non-Catholic, non-Orthodox Christians. So if you were to say Catholic and Protestant, mix 50-50, mix something else, how would you put that?
When it comes to Christian denominations, it's not as straightforward as Catholic or Protestant. So we have
no, it's not. But so let's say Catholic and non-Catholic on one side, and non-Catholic, non-Orthodox on the other side.
I actually don't know. I know Olga, who presents in the evening, is, I think, evangelical. It's not something, we don't kind of label each other. I know there'd be one or two presenters who would probably describe themselves as agnostic. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking, Wendy, is because you said absolutely correctly that religion is part of our culture, at least for many people. But even with the collapse in the number of people declaring themselves Catholics in Ireland in recent censuses, Catholics outnumber all non-Catholic denominations by more than 10-1. And I think it would be reasonable to observe that the culture and the influence and the output of your station doesn't remotely reflect that.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll tell you what I mean.
Give me an example.
Absolutely, because as I was preparing, I had your station on, having a listen. I've done it a few times. And one of the things that was being promoted is, and I was going to say anti-scientific, that's not correct, a pseudo-scientific, what is called in the United States, creationist, a little spiel, 1 or 2 minutes of somebody using, and I use the phrase deliberately, pseudo-scientific, that is to say, pretending to address scientific issues entirely falsely and promoting the idea that evolution is, in some sense, scientifically nonsense. And it's very clear that that idea is coming straight from a particular brand of American fundamentalism, which really has no purchase in Ireland. And it strikes me that that is a use of your license and your on-air presence that is addressing something that barely exists in Irish culture.
Yeah, I don't know the particular thing that you're referring to.
I guess you just picked it up from some American network voice, clearly an American accent, giving what was supposed to sound scientific, so using scientific terms and attempting to promote what is called creationism, which is a pseudoscience which supposedly proves that the world was created 6,000 years ago and the dinosaurs are fake and so forth. I'm not going to get into that debate.
It's interesting because one of the big debates in the scientific community at the moment is that big thing of, can scientists question Darwinism?
No, that's not a big debate. That's absolutely not a big debate in science.
I would disagree, but I'm not I wouldn't describe myself personally as a creationist.
There is no scientist of any purchase who holds the position that another scientist cannot be contested.
I disagree with that. But
no, you would be laughed out of any scientific department in any university. There may well be blogs and so forth that is utterly unscientific. But my point is, and I'll say it explicitly, the influence of what is obviously that narrow brand of American evangelical fundamentalism, which has almost zero purchase in Ireland. It has basically, the number of people who follow that particular religious belief is a rounding error. And that is, I'm not going to say it's the only voice on your station, or even, I'm not going to say it's a dominant voice on your station, but it has a position on your station that vastly outstrips its purchase with Irish people.
Well, then people can choose to listen or not to listen, can't they? Isn't
Sure,
that the
they
whole
absolutely
point?
can, but Spirit Radio has a public good, a slot on the dial, which, as you say, stations fight for years to try and get, and the point that people can listen or not isn't entirely valid. If you're putting that on a website, yeah, space on the internet is functionally infinite.
Ah, no, hang
but
on.
the
I
space on the
disagree.
dial is not.
If there's something on the radio I don't want to listen to, I change the station. You know, I
Absolutely,
totally
and that's a
disagree
position
with
I
that. You can
support.
choose. And you know what? We live in a kind of a media landscape now where increasingly you can tailor what you listen to your particular choices. It's so niche. You can, when it comes to like podcasts or Spotify.
No.
you
Hold
can
on. Now
listen
stop,
to
Wendy.
digital
No,
radio.
Wendy. Podcasts and Spotify are not a valid comparison because they do not use any.
No, the
public
point
good.
is you have more choice than ever before to listen to whatever you want to listen to.
That's true, but there are many voices excluded from the radio dial, and you have a privileged position on the radio dial. Well, for example, do we have Jihadi FM?
Well, they'd have to do what we did, wouldn't they, and apply for a license and go through that process for years and years.
Sure, and I think that is a scarce resource. Space on the radio dial is a scarce resource, and for that reason, you are allowed to do things in private space that you're not allowed to do in public, and the radio dial.
So you're trying to silo the Christian perspective into private space?
No, absolutely not, absolutely not. But I think that scarce resource, space on the radio dial, should be shared out proportionally, and that no one voice should be privileged. And let me explain why. Because, as I said before, the rule is, and what it is supposed to be, is that political opinions cannot be privileged on any station, in theory.
But that's where you're confusing a Christian perspective, of which 84.6% of our population still identify as in the latest CSO data. To confuse a political outlook or spectrum with, a Christian lens or Christian worldview, I guess shows a lack of understanding of what it means to be a Christian.
What you understand it to be a Christian, it shows that not everybody accepts what you understand to be a Christian.
And I suppose when people listen to other radio stations, not everybody accepts things they see or hear on other forms of media. And
indeed, but if Wendy deals specifically with the point that in this case, one voice, one particular opinion is being privileged.
No, I don't agree with that, because
that's fair enough. That's fair enough. If you don't agree,
it comes down to what is the makeup of our population?
Okay, well, let me deal with this. Let me deal with the specific issue. I have here a list. Kevin, my co-producer, very kindly has produced a list, and the list is far longer than I could read out, of instances where you've given very soft and very supportive coverage of what's called the Rally for Life and other anti-abortion events. I'm sure you'd agree that there's just no question whatsoever that your station gives a volume and a type of coverage on the abortion issue that isn't remotely balanced.
And I'm sure you'll agree if you were to do a similar analysis of
when they
the
don't
vast
get off the
majority.
topic, you're agreeing that that's not balanced.
Your question. The vast majority of other stations, you could say the exact opposite of the soft interviews given to those who are. And
people can make a complaint to commission them out for that.
Hold on for a second.
Wendy, allow me to finish. The point is that many of the topics which are considered or which are dear to people of political outlook, particularly that brand of American fundamentalism, many of those topics intrude explicitly into the political domain, particularly abortion. We know in this country that 66% of people voted for the particular referendum to permit abortion. About 1/3 of the third, so about 11% of the other voters said that they endorsed the idea of abortion being legal, but thought that the provision being proposed and accepted was too liberal. So about 77% of people, which obviously includes a majority of the Catholics in Ireland, support abortion being legal as it is or in some other form. And that is not the impression somebody would get from listening to your output. Would you accept that?
There's so many points I could make there. The first is,
core point, I will say it in one sentence. The Christian position, as you call it, Christian position that you represent, doesn't remotely represent what is actually believed by Catholics and Christians in Ireland.
So basically, you're just airbrushing 1/3 of the population. On their,
about 22%. No, but not at all. No, I'm defending Wendy.
I'm trying to answer the question. What I would say is this: is that I would suspect that a huge number of people who might describe themselves as soft yes voters or I'm pro-choice, but I would suspect that many of them would be utterly horrified at the fact that we now have more than 10,000 abortions happening in this country. That's a 200% increase. Now, when they voted for abortion, the then Taoiseach at the time said it would be rare. It would be rare. He himself, Leo Varadkar himself, has since admitted that's a lot. Okay,
Wendy, are you using the evidence of your suspicion over and above what happened at the ballot box?
Say that again?
Are you using the evidence that is your suspicion over and above the evidence that is the result of the referendum?
Well, the premise that people voted on was for that abortion would be rare. Now, when we said, and I'm always very upfront when I'm on programs saying this is the position I hold. Unfortunately, other journalists who might hold another position aren't always so upfront about that, but that's another story. You also have a situation where there has to be a voice that is providing, RTE recently did a documentary on this issue. It genuinely was the most partisan, biased piece of
and I have challenged RTE when they're on, but I'm challenging you here.
Thing, William. So people wouldn't know that. I mean, if I'm a journalist, what is the basic foundation of when you're doing a documentary? Facts and figures. They didn't address. I mean, you can say, I'm pro-choice, but I'm not happy that the abortion rate has increased so much, or I'm pro-choice and I'm not actually entirely comfortable with the fact that now, and this wasn't the case pre-legislation,
that's not what's happening on your station. What you're doing is giving soft coverage and unchallenging interviews to one side only in that debate, very much a minority side. And
that's where I think that's where maybe you would probably need to listen to a few more of those interviews on that topic, because when I'm creating my interview questions, I always balance the hard questions with the more open-ended questions, as you'd like to call them. And
Wendy, so are you, just to clarify, are you saying that your personally and Spirit in general coverage of the abortion issue is balanced within the Irish political landscape?
I think it is providing balance in a landscape that's
but on its own internally, is it balanced?
To ask the hard questions on this particular issue, which overwhelmingly ignores the facts, ignores women who want to tell their stories about.
There are no facts. There are no facts.
So tell me how I would. I'll tell you about the most recent interview that I've done. I haven't put it out yet. A woman contacted me who had an abortion and was pictured with, political representatives, all those flying their kind of pro-abortion flags. She now deeply regrets it. Years later, she feels that she was used and manipulated.
Wendy, the plural of anecdote is not.
Can I just finish? Because you're asking. I'm trying to answer the question with this example. And to be quite honest,
the question is a yes/no answer. Is a yes/no question, and you can expand, but start with a yes or a no. Is your coverage balanced on abortion?
I think that it is. I think it is providing balance on the issue. Yes, I do.
Okay, fair enough.
And I would always ask the hard questions of those who are from pro-life organisations.
Okay, you saying that it's balanced. Did you give balanced coverage to pro-abortion or pro-choice rallies and protests of work that you give to the Rally for Life?
We're not actually bound to do that during the referendum period. Obviously, it was in
general.
Particular. If somebody asked me to come on, if pro-choice organisation got on and they could, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
And again, you're not. I would ask the same question of every other radio station, or I'd be most concerned with our national broadcaster.
Yeah, and so would I, Wendy. I agree with you on that. So let's not discuss that. What you're
saying is, okay, well, because it's only a third of people who might feel this way, we should, airbrush asking the hard questions. We should say so. The reason I was giving you that
hard questions equally of both sides.
The reason I was, but that's not happening in any setting at the moment. That's the
not
point.
An excuse for you not.
And it was actually funny during the referendum, because I was so committed to balance, to having we have to do it, you're legally obliged to, that, and obviously I would have, pro-life
The
friends.
rules are different during the campaign, but you're actually, at least in other stations, you're legally obliged to be balanced all the time.
That doesn't happen. That's for sure.
And emphatically, it doesn't happen with Greg. But I don't want to get bogged down.
Yeah, but the point is this, and I just want to finish
your point, and we will move to a different topic.
To that woman who got in touch with me. So all of these people who wanted to fly her flag when she was on one side, now she wants to tell her story. She believes her story is one that deserves an airing.
Yeah.
Nobody else will have her on. All the people who were, cheering her on when she was pushing abortion, now she's saying, actually, I deeply regret this. This wasn't good for me. I deserve a voice, are ignoring her. The politicians who took pictures with this woman, ignoring her. The radio stations, the newspapers. That for me shows you how biased the media is on this particular issue. And I think it is a healthy thing. Other jurisdictions would have, for example, in the UK, they would have newspapers that would lean more in a pro-life perspective. There's media diversity. We just don't have it here.
I totally agree, Wendy, that we don't have media diversity, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's a good idea that you're on the air. But let me just go on to a different topic, because I think it is unarguable that what is happening is that you are using the religious label to smuggle in unbalanced coverage of topics that are explicitly in the political domain. And I think it is very notable, Wendy. I think
that's a very unfair representation, actually.
You've made that point very clearly. But Wendy, for example, the sort of thing that I would expect would at least be included, maybe not all the time, is on a religious radio station when you're having a debate, is a religious debate. Have you ever had a debate on transubstantiation? Have you ever had a debate on actual religious topics that are contested between, maybe different religions or different aspects of the same religion? Hold on for a second. Oh no, Wendy. Or which do not intrude onto politics. Because I searched on your website, and I had you on in the background for a while, and I actually, of all the debate is the wrong word, of all the contested coverage, or where you're covering an issue that is contested, I literally could not find a single one. So I'm asking
it wouldn't really make much sense when our remit was, and part of our license is, a Christian radio station that unifies different denominations. So to be having
that includes discussing the differences.
About having debates about some of the, we focus on what unites us, not what divides us. We focus on our commonalities rather than the things that we might argue about. That would be totally counterintuitive to our mission, to our success, to our supporting different denominations. It just doesn't make any sense.
Really?
Yeah, I just find that quite amusing, actually. If we're trying to be a Christian radio station, that is, why would you have debates on transubstantiation when you're trying to bring together the north and south of the island and different denominations? The only
can I answer that? Wendy, I know that you're a radio host and you're used to asking the questions, and I don't normally allow interviewees to ask the questions. But the reason why you would allow that is to allow each side on that, if you want to characterize it as each side, to better understand the position of the other side and to get a better understanding of their humanity, and not to see the other side as a monolith that is just unifiedly wrong. That's why you would debate somebody that you disagree with. And I just find it astonishing that are you seriously telling me that you would not allow, or you would not think that a debate on a contested religious issue is, and I want to move away from transubstantiation, which is very complicated, whatever, but to give an analogy, for example, within Islam, there is a minority view that jihad means some sort of violent spreading of the religion. The dominant view in Islam is that jihad is an internal personal struggle with God. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but my point is that there is a diversity of views there, and people talk that to death. And where jihad means that some people would turn to violence, I think that debating that point internally to that religion is something that's very important. And talking to people that you disagree with and talking about what you disagree has far more chance of being a unifying force than ignoring those topics. Do you really disagree with that?
I don't disagree with those discussions and debates happening in
Yeah.
general, but Spirit Radio
But
is
not on
not
your
the
radio.
platform for that. No, because it's
But
not the
you have
platform for
very,
that.
very contested, because I would suggest, Wendy.
You're asking me a question and then you're
Go
not
on.
allowing me to answer.
Go ahead, then answer.
We have a board of directors that's made up of different denominations for a reason. We have different guests from different denominations for a reason. I would be involved with things outside of the radio station that are bringing different churches together, and always the core foundation of those things, for those things to work, for there to be unity, for there to be, things that for there to be growth, actually, is that we focus on what unites us and what divides us. I don't see how a radio station whose mission and purpose is to help people begin or renew a relationship with God in whatever setting they choose would want to try and pit one denomination against another. It's like I say, yeah, fine.
Are you sure you're not doing that? Because, for example,
it's just not the platform for it, you know?
Oh, no, but Wendy, for example, the vast majority of Irish Christians, specifically of Christians, the vast majority of Irish Christians would have no truck with this idea of creationism. The great majority of Irish Christians would laugh at that. What you're doing is you are promoting the minority side of that. I hesitate to call it a debate, that the minority side by a wide margin of that issue. You are promoting that in the teeth of what is believed by almost all Irish Christians. How is that promoting unity?
Well, I guess you haven't listened to the broad spectrum of our programming. One of my favourite guests, and indeed I did a lengthy series with him, was Dr. Peter Taylor, astrophysicist, and talking about, from a scientific perspective, science and faith, probably one of the most best regarded astrophysicists in the country. So that's the type of thing I focus on. And there's diversity of perspective there. So I think, taking like one snippet of particular...
But Wendy, there isn't a diversity of perspective that remotely.
That's where you're
reflects...
wrong. I've just given you an example. I don't take that position.
But when in the last hour on your station, you broadcast a several-minute long monologue of utterly unscientific garbage, attempting to assert that the biblical
William,
Adam and Eve story was that Wendy, don't back out of that question. Wendy, don't back out of that question.
You asked the question 3 times in about 3 different ways. I don't know how else I can. I don't actually know the particular piece you're talking about.
But I'm describing it for you. Garbage promoting what's called creation.
If you'd been fair to me, which I would have done.
Go ahead, speak as long as you like.
If you wanted me to comment on a particular piece of programming that is not on my show, if you had an interview or something you wanted to refer to on my program, that's fine. But if you wanted me to comment on a specific text,
I don't want you to comment on that.
I'd need to see it and read it. I don't know actually what you're talking about. I don't even know the piece of output that you're referring to. I haven't even heard it.
I'm not asking you to comment on that, Wendy.
So I can't comment on it. That's the point.
I'm not asking you to comment on it. I'm asking you to. I'm asking you to recognise that, let's say, the centre of gravity of Spirit Radio doesn't remotely reflect the centre of gravity of belief of Irish Christians.
Well, I suppose that's where I would disagree with you. Certainly, when I can speak for my own programme, that's all. That's what I can speak for. And
you're correct that I've interrupted you. So please say what you want to say without interruption for as long as you can.
Of my particular show, 10 to 12, I'm very proud of the output that we create, and I think that it's one of the best things for me about the station is the amount of people that have gotten in touch over the years who have been, for example, struggling with their mental health, and it's been described so many times as a light in the darkness. That is, for me, is only a good thing. I have to say, and increasingly people whisper in my ears, if I'm doing a TV show or something, oh, I actually really love that station. They might kind of say it quietly. So it's obviously fulfilling a need there for some people. I think it is doing good. I think it's overwhelmingly positive and having a positive impact for the people that listen to it. That type of feedback, all I can go on is the type of feedback we are getting from listeners. That's the type of things that they're saying. I am very proud to be part of it. I think it's something that's necessary and needed in this country.
What interview are you proudest of?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I mean, the interviews I like the most are just on everyday topics. Yesterday, I did an interview with Dr. Richard Hogan. I feel like on my show, sometimes I am talking about things that other stations aren't talking about. And I'm not talking about some of the social and political issues that you've been talking about. I did this interview about the impact of access to pornography for children on mobile phones, and the data there, and just the hardcore violent stuff they're seeing, the connection to, sexually aggressive behavior, all these sorts of things, and talking about them in a way that's open and honest. And, that's the type of stuff I like doing, and being able to speak about these things openly without kind of, fear of an advertiser or indeed political influence kind of breathing down my neck. I really have a lot of, independence and oversight on my own show. I don't have anything to do with any of the other programming. And that's what I'm proud of, so that's all I can speak to.
Wendy, I realize that you have a time pressure. I very much appreciate you coming on. Can I offer an open invitation? I will either come on your show, or you are more than welcome to come back. And I would suggest that we debate the proposition that the coverage that you are talking about there of social issues might be detrimental to the effect that I think that you said that you're hoping to have. But I want to be respectful of your time, and it's unfortunate that we don't have more time. And Wendy Grace, morning show presenter on Spirit Radio, which is available almost all around the country, and also the director of a communications training company. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you talking to me.
Thank you.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. And while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow Wendy Grace at Wendy Ann Grace. And get in touch if you want to suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. It covers the cost of keeping the podcast going. And if you could throw in a couple of euro once or twice a month, please do go and sign up at patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website. Also there you'll find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.